someone read for us Revelation 12, verse 3?
There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads.
So we see here this great red dragon is presented here. John sees this sign, describes it as a wonder in heaven that he sees. We discussed a bit about this last time, but who is this dragon? And where are we told? Where are we given its identity? Galen.
Verse 9.
And what does it tell us there?
And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him.
So we have here this dragon is this symbol representing the devil, Satan. It speaks about him being cast out. Now we have that in chapter 12, and we summarize this a little bit, but in chapter 13 we have another sort of beast mentioned. We have a beast coming up out of the sea. Does someone want to read Revelation 13 verses 1 to 3?
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast.
Now, what does that tell us about the relationship between the dragon or Satan and this next beast that rises out of the sea?
They have the same number of heads and horns.
Yep. Galen?
It says in verse 2 that the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So the dragon is behind what the beast is doing, because he's got authority, he's got power, and he's also been given his seat. So he's been put into place. Yeah, he's been put in place. And then he's been given all this authority and power to do whatever it is that the dragon wants him to do. It's like almost like the dragon's a puppet master in a way. Pulling the strings.
Yeah, Ian.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just noticed the difference in crowns. 7 crowns for the dragon and 10 crowns, but the 10 crowns become 7 anyway for the beast. I think. Well, certainly the number of horns, change when those 3 were taken away. There's a slight difference there, but it's kind of similar.
Well, another interesting point there is back in Revelation 12 with the dragon, he says he's got 7 crowns, but where are those crowns? Yeah, on his head. And in Revelation 13, where are the crowns? They're on the horns. Now, if we'll look at this more when we get up to Revelation 13, but I'm sure in the description of that beast, it brought to mind the book of Daniel, Daniel 7, where we see a leopard, we see a bear, we see a lion, we see this beast that has 10 horns. And that's this prophecy that goes down. And interesting enough, if you add up all those beasts in that vision, there's 7 heads between them all. And so the beast here is represented as sort of the culmination of those satanic forces that are used by Satan to persecute God's people and try to destroy the truth. And Revelation 12 is happening during the time where it's the beasts themselves that are ruling. Whereas Revelation 13 is taken into place where it's the time where the horns are ruling. So it's just an interesting point to note and to tuck away from when we get into that more, that helps us understand how the chronology flows out through here. But so in Revelation 12, we've got the dragon that is Satan. In Revelation 13, we see this beast from the sea, and Satan gives to this beast his power, his seat, and great authority. Now, we have another beast rising up in Revelation 13. Can somebody read Revelation 13, verse 11 and 12?
And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon. And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
So what does that tell us about the relationship again between this beast, the one before it, and the dragon? Or whose power does this beast exercise?
Dragons.
Yep, absolutely. It tells us that this beast from the earth exercises all the power of the first beast, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the sea got all its power from the dragon. So you got these 3 powers being represented here: the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth, all exercising satanic power in their persecution of God's people. Now, there's something else we're going to look at with these 3: the dragon, the beast from the sea, which is commonly referred to as the beast, and the beast from the earth, which is also referred to as the false prophet, as it does all these miracles to deceive the world. Later on, it's referred to as the false prophet. But we're going to jump back at the dragon, and we're going to look at some interesting things that happened between these 3 things. Now, this dragon, where was his place? Can someone read in Revelation 12, verse 3, and then verse 7 to 8? Where is this dragon from?
12:3, then 7 and 8.
Mm-hmm.
And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and crowns upon his heads. and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven.
Hmm. So where are we told that the dragon's place was?
In heaven.
In heaven, yep. And find this interesting. We're going to compare this to what we find in Revelation with regards to the Father. Can someone read, well, in Revelation chapter 4, someone read Revelation 4 verse 1. Revelation 4 verse 1.
After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter.
And so John there, he's taken up in vision. He goes into, this door open in heaven. He goes through there, and what does he see as soon as he is called up? What's presented in the rest of chapter 4?
Throne room, and the throne, and one who sits on the throne.
Yep, absolutely. And who is the one seated on the throne?
Father.
Yep, the Father's pictured there as being, in heaven and seated on the throne. And it's interesting that when you looked at the dragon, he's described there as having his place in heaven. And also, he is described as having his throne. Can somebody read Revelation 2? Revelation 2 verse 13.
I know thy works, where thou dwellest, even where Satan seateth, and thou holdest fast my name, and hast not denied my faith, even in those days wherein Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was slain among you, where Satan dwelleth.
Does anyone have an alternate translation or a margin reading for where it talks about Satan's seat?
What verse was that again? I was writing other stuff down.
Revelation 2 verse 13. Just let me read it out of the ESV. Translate that. I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. That word there for seat, translated as seat in the King James, is the Greek word thronos. It's the same word used in Revelation 4 for the throne. It's speaking about Satan's throne.
I've got the Amplified here.
Yeah. What's that got to share with us?
I know where you live, a place where Satan sits enthroned, yet you are clinging to and holding fast my name, and you did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed, martyred in your midst, where Satan dwells.
Yep. So there it talks about where Satan was enthroned. And in Revelation 13:2, when we read about the sea beast, what did the dragon give to the beast? Galen?
Power, authority, and his seat.
And the word seat there is again the word throne. And so it's interesting that when it starts describing the dragon, initially it describes him as being in heaven. He has a throne, just like God the Father is described being in heaven and having a throne. But it's interesting there in Revelation 13, the dragon gives his power, seat, and authority to the one that comes after him. Now, does the Father give his authority, his power, and share his throne with anyone else?
Yeah, of course.
I hope so.
Yeah. There's a number of verses on that. Does someone want to read Matthew 28:18?
And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, All power is given unto me in heaven and in earth.
So Christ saying again, he received all power in heaven and earth. Now, can someone turn to Revelation 2, verse 27?
I've got the European version here. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received from my Father.
So again, Christ is speaking about that power to rule he received from his Father. We have one more verse in Revelation 3, verse 21.
To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame and am set down with my Father in his throne.
So the dragon gave his seat, power, and authority to the one that was coming after him. And here we see the Father gives, all, Christ says, all authority is his, power he's given him, and he's given to sit on the throne with the Father. And so it's interesting that we start seeing all these parallels developing between the dragon in Revelation 12 and what we're told about the Father. Can somebody read back in Revelation chapter 13? In Revelation 13, verse 4.
Can we just hold that and go back to that last verse?
Yep.
In Schofield, it says, to him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I also overcame and am set down with my Father in his throne.
Yep.
So it's not often we get Jesus recorded as talking about his throne being different to his Father's throne, and yet he's able to sit on both thrones.
Yep.
So that I thought might be helpful.
Yep, that is an interesting point. Thank you. Revelation 13, verse 4.
And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?
So what is the dragon receiving here?
Sorry, everyone. Can I interrupt again?
Oh,
Please say hello. Say hello to Sweetie Pie.
good night, Payton.
Say, how are you all?
Good, thank you, Peyton.
Say, I'm trying to be good. Right. She's a good girl. This Papa that's bad, eh? Say good night.
Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams.
Sweet. Number
Yeah.
one, sweet dreams.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye.
Good night.
She really loves that. Thank you. Sorry, Matt.
No, no worries.
Worship is the answer,
Yep.
I think.
Yep. The dragon receives worship. And in Revelation 4 and 5, that heavenly throne room scene, what is that all about? We've looked at that previously. If those of you who joined us can cast your minds back to that. Galen?
It's a big worship scene. We have the 24 elders worshipping the Father, and then Christ, for want of a better phrase, shows up, and then we have it was the four beasts that worship the Father, and then the 24 elders join in.
Mhm.
Then Christ shows up, and then you've got the 24 elders, you've got the four beasts, you've got the angels, 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. No. Oh yes, and every creature which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth. So yeah, there's a massive worship scene of both the Father and his Son, of different groups, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's this heavenly worship scene where both the Father and Son are worshipped. Just an interesting point to note here as well. In Revelation 13, when they worship the dragon, it's interesting that it says they worship the dragon, which gave his power to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast?" So it's saying they worship the dragon and the beast, both received worship, when the people were saying, "Who is like the beast?" It's this idea that the dragon received his worship through the beast. Similarly to the Father and Son, they're both worshipped, but we worshipped the Father through the Son. You know, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." And so it's interesting as we look through this, there seems to be more and more parallels building up between the dragon and the Father. And we see that we start seeing things with this beast paralleling the Son of God. It's almost like leading up to the end times, we get this idea that Satan is impersonating the Father and Son here. That he's being describing, the book's describing him in similar ways. Galen.
So then that would be with regards to verse 3. Yeah, we've got Christ and Calvary and his resurrection. We've got here that one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and the deadly wound was healed. So we know that Christ, he died, he rose, and there was a following. The gospel went out and there was a following. So here we've got the same, the death, the healing, and the wondered after the beast, the following. So it's a pretty close counterfeit in that regard.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. Christ said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. Speaking of his death and resurrection, and this beast died and was brought back. His deadly wound was healed. It's a resurrection, and all the world wonders. Now we got Colin, and then Ian.
And Petra might support me on this. In that discussion we had about with the Reform Movement group down here, in their argument for the Trinity, they often would say Satan's counterfeiting what God has in heaven, and would bring in that there's three opponents to the devil side of the attack, and using that as a way of validating their understanding of these three that make up the Trinity, or the Godhead, as they would soften it back. And you just mentioned it's like the copying or following the lead of what's happening in the kingdom. So yeah, I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I find it interesting because we often speak about looking at end times where Satan will impersonate Christ as one of the last, big deceptions. He'll walk on earth impersonating Christ. But it's interesting here. It seems like we get a similar idea in Revelation here, that Satan is impersonating Christ throughout this time, but it's you could say it's almost like a theologically impersonating him as well. He will literally impersonate him towards the end, but he's theologically impersonating him leading up to the end. Because, and again, when we look at who these powers are, Revelation 13, we're dealing with the papacy as the beast from the sea, and Protestant America specifically in the beast from the earth. That these are the powers that Satan's using to push his counterfeit of the Godhead. And so to that response, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, it tells us that Satan is counterfeiting that, but what is the counterfeit that's advocated by these two powers that the Bible tells us are satanic powers, the papacy and Protestantism? What is the theological counterfeit that they've accepted regarding the Godhead? Ian.
Yeah, I've heard this one before, and I know it's a tricky thing. It's like reverse clarification, like trying to use Satan to clarify God.
Validate, yeah.
It's like trying to work out if chocolate's good by carob, if you want to go back to our original discussion. But and how carob like the chocolate's flavor is. There's another couple of parallels there. I notice in the start of Revelation 13, you've got the seat and the power and authority coming from the dragon to the lamb-like beast, the lamb-like beast, same as to the lamb. And I was also thinking about these crowns. The lamb-like beast doesn't have crowns, and that sort of fits very nicely with our understanding of who the lamb-like beast might be. There's never been a king on that continent. Well, in the continent, maybe. No, probably not in the continent. There's no king of United States anyway. That was all.
So in Revelation 13, you said we've got this that the beast arises and begins its sort of you could say its satanic ministry begins its work. Where does it rise from to start its work upon the earth?
The sea.
The sea. Yep. So its ministry started when it rose up out of the water. What was the point at which Christ's ministry started? What event started his ministry?
His baptism.
Yeah, it is baptism. There in Matthew 3, John the Baptist is, preparing the way. And then Christ comes upon the scene, he's baptized, the heavens open, and then he begins his ministry. So both Christ and this beast there in Revelation 13, the first beast, begin their ministry from rising up from the water. How long does this beast in Revelation 13, how long does it continue for? Galen.
3.5 prophetic years,
Hmm.
which is 42 months or 1260 years, which is the 3.5, the time times and dividing of time, the 3.5 years. So it's prophetic.
Yep, absolutely. There in Revelation 13, verse 5, we're told 42 months, which is 3.5 years. So if there's prophetic years, how many years did Christ's ministry on earth last?
Three and a half.
So both this beast from the sea and Christ had a ministry that lasted 3.5 years, although one was prophetic and one's literal. They both started their ministry after rising from the water. They both had a death and resurrection, after which the world followed after them. In Revelation 13 verse 1, what is this beast described as having? What's these descriptions that he has? How is the beast described there in Revelation 13:1?
Seven heads, 10 horns, upon horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name blasphemy.
Now, if we turn to Revelation 5, in Revelation 5, again back in this throne room setting, can somebody read for me Revelation 5 and verse 6?
And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth.
So we see there Christ is described as a beast having horns as well. And can someone read Revelation 19:12.
His eyes were a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself.
So in Revelation 13, there's a beast that has horns and many crowns. Here in Revelation, Christ is depicted as a beast, a lamb, with horns, and here he has many crowns. And the beast has names of blasphemy written on him. Here, Christ has other names as well. In there, it's a name that no one knows. In verse 16, it says, he have on his vesture and his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So they both have horns, both have crowns, both described as beasts, both have names written on them, both start their ministry after rising from the water, both have a 3.5 years, both have a death and resurrection, with the world wandering after them after that. Both received their power, their throne, and their authority from the one before them. Galen.
They both have a city as well.
Mm-hmm.
One's Babylon and one's Jerusalem or New Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. And so we see that the dragon has several parallels to the Father. This beast from the sea has several parallels to the Son. And now I'm going to look at a few parallels that are found between this beast from the earth and the Spirit. Can someone read Revelation 13, verse 14? Or 13 and 14.
Revelation 13, 13 and 14.
Yep.
And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live.
So what is the job of this beast from the sea? What is his the work or the ministry that he has?
Great wonders, deception.
Mm-hmm.
And idolatry, encouraging it.
Yep, absolutely. I think it hits home on that in Revelation 19:20. It mentions that again, and it really picks up on that deceptive point when it talks about their destruction. It says, and the beast was taken with the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that received the mark of the beast and them that worship the image. And so, there where it describes their destruction, and here where it talks about their rising. In both places, it picks out that the beast from the earth, this false prophet, is the one that had the ministry to lead people into error, to lead people into believing the lie, to accept the lie as though it were truth. Now, can someone read John 16, verse 13? And we've got the question of how does this parallel the false prophet? How does that parallel the ministry of the Spirit?
Howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth. For he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak, and he will show you things to come.
So what parallels or contrast do we have between the ministry of the false prophet and the ministry of the Holy Spirit? Galen.
They speak of somebody else and not themselves. They point to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They both point to the one before them.
Yeah.
You know, Christ says, you know, that the Spirit will bring to remembrance all things that you have heard of me. And the false prophet deceives people that they would receive the mark of the first
Join in,
one
Joe.
that came before.
It's almost like this one says, he will guide you into all truth in John. It's almost like in Revelation, it's like he will guide you into all error, sort of thing.
Someone just had their hand up. Did they have a comment they wanted to share? No worries. Yeah, so we've got a couple of things there. They both point to the one that came before them, to lead people to the one that came before them, and to lead them to accept what they're saying is truth. The Holy Spirit's leading us into all truth. The false prophet's leading people into a lie, or rather to accept what the beast says as being the truth. Can someone jump back into Revelation 13 and read verse 12?
And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was killed.
So whose power does he exercise? Galen.
He exercises the power of the first beast, but the first beast gets his power direct from the dragon. So it's still the dragon's power by proxy.
Yep.
I guess.
And we get the same thing with the Holy Spirit. You know, back there in John 16, Christ says, you know, he shall glorify me, for he shall receive of mine and shall show it unto you. But at the same time, he says, you know, all power in heaven and earth is given unto me. The Father gave all power unto the Son, and the Son says the Holy Spirit will take what's mine and show it to you. So we see there that both are exercising the authority of the one that came before them. They're, you know, exercising the power and authority of the one that came before them. And can someone read verse 15 in Revelation 13?
And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed.
So what do we find the the false prophet doing here that parallels the work of the Spirit? Galen.
Bit of an odd way to look at it, but one gives life and one gives death.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a bit of an oddball one, but
That is, it gives life to the image of the beast, so that those who would not worship would be killed.
So there's a convert or destroy thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Which is ultimately true of the life that Christ offers. If we don't worship him, eventually we're destroyed as well. It's a proper counterfeit.
Yeah. So again, the false prophet, it again leads people to worship the one that came before him, and it also gives life to the image of the beast. Now, I find this another interesting parallel in that the Spirit gives life. We have the idea of the creation, God breathed in Adam's nostrils the breath of life, that gave life. When Ezekiel saw the vision of, in the valley of dry bones, and the Spirit of God gave life to them. But also, we've got this image of the beast that is going to be risen. That there's this other entity, this image of the beast that came before, is given life by the false prophet. Just like we are to be, the image of God, we're to have Christ dwelling in us. We're going to have, his image, and that is that life given to us by the Spirit that enters us. And so there's just so many parallels here between the two. The false prophet here, we're told it performs miracles. There in verse 13, sorry. What are the miracles that it performs? Gannon.
It would be healing miracles, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So they cause a disease to happen and then they provide a cure for that disease.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that goes with the deceptive nature. Ian.
Fire coming down out of heaven. Sounds a little bit like Acts chapter 2.
Mm-hmm. There's sort of like a counterfeit of Pentecost, when the Spirit came and there was tongues of fire on the disciples. This false prophet brings fire down from heaven, and that deceives the world to wander after it. Gannon.
Yes, I can understand how there's going to be supernatural occurrences in the future. At the moment, what we're seeing is man-made occurrences. And so the fulfillment of Matthew 24 is quite interesting when you see how, for example, if they did make an earthquake happen, or if they did make a war happen, or if they did make something happen, like with human power right now, and then later when they have the power through Satan to be able to do supernatural powers, then we start seeing the fulfillment of these verses very strongly. But what we have now is just a small taste of what will happen in the future. I mean, I reflected upon how it's described as a beast, right? And we looked at verse 15, how it says the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the beast should be killed. I'm sure a lot of people have been character assassinated or job assassinated at the moment in a man-made setting, but later on there'll come to a time where it would be a literal setting, not just a workplace setting or a different like work environment setting.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in that discussion also. Oh, I'm just drifting away from the thought. The oh, just slipped out of me. We're talking about the dragon. No, I had an interesting thought then.
No worries. We'll carry on. Maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, hopefully.
Galen.
This is probably a bit of a stretch, but it says that in verse 17, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark. Outside of he that had the mark, just the sort of the buying and selling, it's almost like when you want to buy something, the most basic sort of things we can buy are food, kind of necessity wise. And the most basics of food, you hear about people, bread and water is the most basic sort of thing we tend to think of, and but yet you can't buy bread, but Christ gives bread because he is the bread of life. So one gives and one takes. I find, I don't know, it's might be a bit of a slant on it or a bit outside, but I see that one as well.
Mm-hmm. Gannon.
I would like to share two different points. One is on the great red dragon. Now, this year, when I was studying Revelation and Daniel, and I was also reading For Spirit of Prophecy, I came across an interesting statement which talks about this. So I just put it down. It says in the first sentence, in the book of the Revelation, under the symbols of a great red dragon, a leopard-like beast, and a beast with lamb-like horns, Revelation 12 and 13, are brought to view those earthly governments which are especially engaged in trampling upon God's law and persecuting his people. Their war is carried forward to the close of time. The people of God, symbolized by a holy woman and her children, are greatly in the minority. In the last days, only a remnant exists. God speaks of them as those that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus, Revelation 12:17. And I'll just add one more. I can't copy it all because it's a bit long, but I'll copy the first sentence of it. And then the next paragraph says, through the great powers controlled by paganism and the papacy, symbolized by the dragon and the leopard-like beast, Satan for many centuries destroyed God's faithful witnesses. Under the dominion of Rome, they were tortured and slain for more than 1,000 years. But the papacy was at last deprived of its strength and forced to desist from persecution. Revelation 13:3 and 10. So one thing that I learned was that we know that we say dragon, we associate that with Satan straight away, and that's true. But also in Revelation 12, as what she says here, it's symbolized by paganism. right? So it's called a great red dragon, and it has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. And so when we think about paganism, we think about like having maybe a king of some sort. And so we can see why the crowns are placed upon the 7 heads, right? Or the place of where the worship takes place or where the kingdom is run from, the location of it. Whereas in Revelation 13 with the beast, the leopard-like beast that comes up from the sea, we see how there's a transfer of that power from the 7 heads to the 10 horns instead. And we know that as the papacy, right? The kingdom of the papacy. And we also see this division in the statue of Daniel as well, where you have the iron, which is pagan Rome, imperial Rome, and then you have it move toward the system of the 10 toes, right? And so we see a lot of parallels here, and we see that all these powers, including paganism, have been against the kingdom of God or the kingdom of grace from the time that they were instituted, even to the end of time as well. So that's just one comment for now. I'll just stop there for now. Just see what people think about that.
No, it's a very interesting point. Like if we go into Revelation 12, we see the woman as a symbol for the church is there. She's pregnant with a child about to give birth. All right, and you know, one of the reasons that God had the people in the Old Testament, you know, he gave the promise to Eve that through her, you know, one of her descendants would be this promised one that would crush the serpent's head. And that was the promise to Abraham as well, that promise would come through him, that the church was to bring Christ into the world. And here, the dragon is depicted as waiting for the birth of Christ in order to kill him, to crush him, to stop what he's doing. And we know that that's what happened under pagan Rome. You know, when Christ was born, Herod had all the babies killed to try to get rid of him. You know, it was Roman officers that had him crucified. It was Rome was the power at the time that Satan was working through to try to destroy Christ. And then his followers after that, the wrath of the dragon, went after persecuting Christianity. And so Satan always works through his agencies. And so here under the dragon in chapter 12 and the beast from the sea and the false prophet in chapter 13, you've got him working through paganism, specifically the Roman Empire, but yeah, more generally paganism, then the papacy, and then Protestantism, Protestant America. Galen.
Satan's like the puppet master. He's the one controlling the strings of, you know, the papacy, the pagan Rome, whatever you want to call them, and whatever system we're up to in regards to the stream of time. But he's still the one pulling the strings. He's still, you know, puppets don't do anything without the puppet master. It's that power and authority that he gives them that allows them to do what they do. And to the extent that, you know, God says is, okay, you know, here's the line, you're not allowed to go any further than that, just like he did with Job. But it still comes down to the fact that Satan's the puppet master behind you don't see the puppet master. You see the puppets, and you know, 9 times out of 10 can see the strings. A lot of people don't see the strings, you know, when it comes to the enemy, because he's, you know, crafty. He uses fishing line, you know, the clear stuff that you can't see. So, yeah.
hmm Yeah, and so that's something I found real interesting. As we looked at the structure of the Book of Revelation, the first 11 chapters deal with sort of repeated events in the seven churches, seven seals, and seven trumpets, of events happening from the sort of time of the early church right up to the second coming, and it repeats the same time frame 3 times. Then we jump into the second half of the book from 12 onwards. It really focuses on more end time stuff. Like yes, it speaks of some of Rome's activities in chapter 12, but it's to set up these figures so we understand the powers that forced this mark of the beast. Who is this end time Babylon? This is the backstory of who these end time powers and players will be. And when it opens this section of the Book of Revelation that deals with the end times, we're given this picture of this counterfeit Godhead that Satan is seeking to impersonate the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And he's doing that through, these agencies that he's using. And the ones there in chapter 13, well, all of them, it's, paganism, it's the papacy, and it's Protestantism, apostate Protestantism, were the powers that he used to spread this false understanding, this false idea of the Godhead. And those ones have they've been deceived. And I just find that quite an interesting, almost warning that it gives as soon as it starts presenting us with what's going to happen towards the end of time. It presents us with a counterfeit Godhead that's being pushed by the papacy and Protestantism. Gannon.
I'll just give a bit more context. When I first read the book Great Controversy, I believe it was a later version. And so this year I got my hands onto a paper copy of the simile version of the 1884 Spirit of Prophecy. And so what it says there is very clear. And as I've been studying Daniel and Revelation, recently I've been looking into the daily and the abomination of desolation. And so in the past, I really didn't know what it was. Like, I've heard different things about it. And just adding it to what we've just learned here, or looked at here, about how you have paganism, which is a force against God's people throughout the earlier times. And then later it was replaced by the papacy as the next force against God's people, right? And then you have Protestantism at the end. But we also see the transition from the daily, which is paganism, to the abomination of desolation, which is related to the papacy there. So you can see the parallels here from the book of Daniel and from the book of Revelation as well.
Absolutely.